Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Well, good afternoon, folks, and welcome to a midweek special through a Scottish Prism. Obviously, why we're here is the Supreme Court judgment today and what it entails for Scotland. Normally, as you know, we have lots of topics. We don't need lots of topics today. We have the one, but I'm joined by a stellar cast. My usual three amigos from Kuala Lumpur today, though. We've got Phil Boswell. Phil, my friend, how are you?
All right. I'm a wee bit. Well, Kuala Lumpur was earlier today and yesterday. I'm in a wee beach resort inspecting a yard halfway between there and Penang up the west coast and the Straits of Malacca. So very, very fortunate, very privileged. But
not in a good mood.
No, who is?
We're joined there down in the borders by my good friend Dr. Yvonne Ridley. Yvonne, how you doing? You've definitely got to get rid of that UK bit out your wee name tag there. Oh, yeah. How are you?
I mean, there's no big surprise why we're here today, is there?
No, there's no surprise either at the judgment, but I'm sure we'll get into all that. Are you well? I'll take that as a yes. Right, and up in Clackmannan-shire, we have our Eva.
Hi, Roddy.
Hi, Eva. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. You see, I'm in my work today. Just arrived back from hospital in Glasgow, and on the shelf behind me, I've got some of my favourite books. One is Alex Salmond, The Dream Will Never Die. There's another, Jim Sellers, In Place of Fear. And the most favourite is an anthology of Robert Burns. And by God, he'd have some words that would be highly appropriate today.
Oh, for sure. It's a hell of a day. And we're also joined by a good friend of the show, Professor Alf Baird. Alf, how are you, my friend? Nice to see you. Long time no see.
Yeah, it's good to see everybody on this auspicious day.
Yeah, always a pleasure, never a chore to have you here. It's very appropriate that you're here, Alf, because this is a hell of a day in the Scottish constitutional wranglings. We all know that the Supreme Court has kicked out the ability for the Holyrood to legislate for an independence referendum. Were you surprised when the result came through, Alf? Or the judgment, rather?
A little bit. I'm not a big fan of a referendum either way, whether we get one or not. I don't think it's the best option for us, but I think everybody really predicted what was going to happen here in that the Constitution is a reserved matter. And also what's coming out in the judgment very clearly is the belief of these judges in the UK Supreme Court that the British Parliament is sovereign. And there's no mention whatsoever of Scottish sovereignty. And this just takes me back to my own research in colonialism, where really the people have no sovereignty. We talk about Scottish sovereignty, but unless we can assert it, unless we are prepared to assert it, it doesn't exist. And only the values, to quote colonialism, is only the values of the colonizer as sovereign. And that's what's coming through in this judgment, is only the values of the colonizer. What's significant to them comes through. And that even the judgment in respect of self-determination is very flawed. It's very flawed. It quotes the Quebec example. And as we all know, Canada's is more of a federal arrangement, and Quebec is part of that structure. And it talks about territorial integrity of Canada. But Scotland is not in that situation. Scotland has a treaty with another country, an international treaty. This judgment just completely disregards that. But it's looking at it, to give it some defence, it's looking at it from a purely domestic UK perspective. We need to get this into the international domain.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Eva, you're our legal eagle. In fact, our resident KC on Twitter was saying, well, you see, the judgment says Scotland's not a colony, so Scotland's not a colony because the English Imperial Court said we're not a colony, so we're not a colony then, Eva. What did you make of the judgment?
I need to study the detail, but the thrust of it obviously is, as Alf has already said, that the Scottish Parliament simply doesn't have the power to hold a referendum because the constitutional issue is reserved, not devolved. So in terms of strict law, one can't really argue with that. It's a foregone conclusion. It always really has been. I'm not surprised by the outcome at all. Where I am dismayed is by those who say that Westminster and those in power within the Westminster government ought now to think again about the democratic deficit and how that should be addressed. For me, that's quite wrong. I think that Scotland's solution should be made in Scotland, by Scotland, for Scotland, and it requires courage. And unfortunately, we have not seen that courage displayed today by our First Minister. What we have seen instead is, unfortunately, another exercise of kicking an SNP can further down the road towards a conference in January, when we know that over the course of the next couple of months, people in Scotland, because we are not independent, will be cold, they will be hungry, and some of them will die unnecessarily. Time is not on their side. So I want to see movement and real action from the people of Scotland, because the people of Scotland have to tell the First Minister loudly and clearly, we want action today, a constitutional convention this weekend, not a talking shop restricted to one political party only a couple of months from now, and an exercise which really, to me, seems only to be continuing to reward those who've already been greatly rewarded for failing to deliver on all of the mandates requiring them to give us our independence.
I would only take issue with one part where you say she's going to have a conference in January. She said in the new year. That could as easily be October next year before she has her conference. So she has kicked the can down the road, but we're going to come on to that. I just want initial reactions. Yvonne, what was your reaction? Surprise, or told you so, or what?
Well, my initial reaction was maybe we should just all charge down to the border at Carter Bar and sit in the road and just say we're not moving. And look, we all knew the outcome before it was even announced. And Sturgeon has gone down there like some bloody Oliver Twist character, holding out a bowl to Mr. Bumble saying, can we have some more, please? And we've been slapped in the face and told to bugger off back up north, and we're not getting independence. You don't ask for independence. You grab it, you win it, you fight for it. This came through the post today. I don't know who sent it, but I'm eternally grateful. And this is, these women knew what it was about. Deeds, not words. And words are going to get us nowhere. I don't know any country that got independence without a bit of a struggle. And quite frankly, we're probably looking rather pathetic in the eyes of those people who fought for independence and went through great hardship, because we're just a bunch of, I hate to quote Thatcher, but we're a bunch of moaning minis at the moment.
But not angry enough.
No, we're not angry enough. We need to get angry. We need to demand our rights, not put our hand up and say, please, can we have?
No, it's quite pathetic. Phil, your initial reaction to the judgment?
Well, it's bitter disappointment, but not at the judgment. The judgment was entirely predictable.
Yeah.
We know this is the Scottish Government, as Tommy so eloquently put it last time, an arm of the British establishment asking another arm of the British establishment to deconstruct the British establishment. Why are we doing this? Unless it's part of a cunning plan that we've talked about many times, unless there's a strategy with options A, B, C, D, contingency plans. If this is what is the strategy here? And now I'm starting to see stuff, and we're holding back here. We're trying to push for unification. My bitter disappointment comes from the SNP response to this. My party's response to this is, well, now we better get busy. What? Really? Now you better get busy? I don't think so. No, we told you, you need to start listening to people that actually have the primary objective of the independence of this nation and its people, and stop. I know we're going to hold, and we're going to try and push for unity, but when I see the behaviours of that, I feel threatened by children saying we can. I'm not going to. I feel threatened. We should deplatform people who are too aggressively fighting for independence. It's got to be my way. You are a child. Crossing the road is scary to you. If you can't handle this, get out our way while we take back our nation for our people. You, child, we will help you and we will sort your future out, because you're certainly incapable of sorting out ours.
Alf, it was, as we've all alluded to, it was kind of predictable this would happen, which begs the question, surely the First Minister and her advisors must have also known it was pretty goddamn predictable. So do they have a secret plan? Or was this, I had one SNP supporter today telling me on social media that this was the whole plan behind it, that Nicola had done this to get a reaction. Does that sound in any way feasible to you?
Yeah, well, I think, as Phil says, the administration we have is basically acting as a colonial administration. It's not acting as a nationalist government trying to secure liberation for the people. It's acting in the interests of Westminster. And in fact, all the SNP ministers are actually ministers of the Crown. They're actually working in that area. They are fully a colonial administration. And this is the problem for the SNP, is they've not changed anybody in the whole administrative structure of institutional Scotland that is pro-independence, really. It's all the same unionist establishment that run everything in Scotland. And that's the thing we have to think about. So post-colonial theory tells us all this happens with a dominant national party. I've been through this before. It tells us once you get a dominant national party, it reaches a cooperation with the imperial power. That's what it does. They've embedded them, they've bedded down into the system, they've bought into the system. What that means as well is they absorb the values of that system. And it's the values of the colonizer that are sovereign, not the people that are oppressed. So what we see in this judgment is just the values of the colonizer, which is you people have got no say in this. And now they're saying worrying things like this matter of independence is a matter for all the peoples of the United Kingdom. And that's in the judgment. Now, that's a worrying trend, because we've heard that from the Tories before, that this is a matter for all of the United Kingdom. And once we get into that realm, we really are forgetting the whole aspect of the claim of right, of sovereignty, of the condition of the Treaty of Union, on the Treaty of Union. So we have to be aware of what's happening here. And the post-colonial theory template of decolonisation, we are actually in that decolonisation process. We don't talk about it in that respect, but that's where we are. And we've been in that process probably seriously for 30, 40, 50 years, but also going back a couple of hundred years, we see the conflicts that have, none of these conflicts, they're all part of our history, but the referendums we had in 79, in the 90s, and now recently in 2014, this is all part of an ongoing decolonisation process. The problem we're going to encounter, and the problem that post-colonial theory tells us and warns us about, is that the longer this goes on, the more chance you've got of having conflict. And that is where the SNP have to say, wait a minute, you can't just keep us putting us up a blind alley. The folk eventually are going to no accept that. So, and this is what leads to conflict, where you delay decolonisation too much, even when you have nationalist majorities, 3 in Holyrood and 3 in Westminster successively we've had over the last decade or so or more. 6 majorities, nationalist majorities, could have pulled the plug on the union any time they wanted, and they've all declined to do that. That goes back to the point I think Yvonne was making about lack of courage, and that that is the same for Estonia, for Kenya, for any country, Ukraine, that's got independence. It needs a bit of courage. What Sturgeon and her team have done is just continually put us down another blind alley. And I'm sure the conference next year will figure out another blind alley for next year, because that's what their agenda is. That's why the independence movement, I think other people like Sarah Salliers and others have alluded to the fact that an independence movement, once it's stymied, once it's stuck up that blind alley, it becomes a liberation movement, because the momentum then changes. You can see you're being intentionally blocked. You're blocked by all the administrative vehicles of the imperial power, the imperial parliament, the imperial courts, the imperial crown. All that is blocking your exit. And eventually people really have no option but to look for alternative ways.
That, that may happen, and I would regret it, but it would be understandable, provocation. But Eva, a colonial administration, I'd just like to make an observation, because I'm going to bring in a second something the First Minister said today about the way forward. But as a colonial administration, when she held her press conference today, she had all the usual suspects there: STV, ITV, Channel 4, BBC, the Mail, the Record, the Sun, the Express. Not a single pro-independence outlet was available. She was playing to the colonial media. She was not talking to the independence movement. But Techie, can you put up that extract from her speech today, which I think it's very important that we look at that, where she said, there we go, "I am therefore confirm that I will be asking the National Executive to convene a special party conference sometime in the new year." It's too little too late. We need to move quicker, Eva. We haven't got time. Time is not on our side.
Well, Roddy, what the people of Scotland who support Scottish independence want, as I said earlier, is action. Now, I didn't watch Prime Minister's questions today. I've seen a couple of little snippets, but I'm pretty confident that none of the 40-odd SNP MPs who would have been there today, who stood outside the Supreme Court and got their photos taken, holding up their saltires and smiling after the decision was known, I don't expect that any of them stood up on a point of order in the House of Commons today and shouted for Scotland. They talk about being stronger for Scotland. I don't imagine that any of them got expelled today, but they could have done. They could actually have walked out en masse in protest at the decision and at its implications. So instead, what we see is not just the can kicked down the road, but a leader who said that she was the de facto temporary leader of the Yes movement, who doesn't want to lead the Yes movement. She wants to lead only her party. And the SNP is not the Yes movement. The SNP is not Scotland, but the SNP is the government. And upon the SNP is the duty to deliver a strategy that leads us towards independence. This can kicking will not do that. So instead of simply being negative, what I would say in a positive, constructive context is that we need that constitutional convention actually yesterday. We need people on the streets. We need international assistance. We need an international voice. But at the moment, it seems that even our own First Minister is not hearing our voices. So by the time that this is broadcast, I think that most of the events that are planned by Leslie Riddoch and her supporters will have occurred tonight in Scotland. The First Minister has to listen to what the people who elected her want. We want to see things change now. Not tomorrow, not next month, not next year, but right now. A drive towards independence where all voices are respected, all voices are listened to, and we can have a debate leading to constructive decisions and lead us towards independence, not up another dark cul-de-sac.
Absolutely. Yvonne, a lot of people are still in denial. I've seen it today already, even after the judgment, that Scotland's an equal partner and we're not a colonised people. But de facto, we are colonised. Is it time for our government to show some balls and go to the UN decolonisation unit and say, we need you to step in here? because every democratic way to us is being stopped?
Well, we are bereft of strong leadership. I mean, what should have happened today was the resignation of Scotland's First Minister.
Yes.
That should have been the first thing. And then there should have been subsequent, a domino effect. I don't know what their plan B is. We've got a leader who has no idea what's on the next page. And it's so frustrating. She should resign.
Yes.
There's the Tory graph is obviously jumping for joy at the result and is saying on the Scottish Parliament website is a section saying what we can't do. And of course, what we can't do is decide on our own future. As you know, in terms of having a sovereign state. And it's there in black and white on the website, and the Telegraph are saying, you know, hasn't she read her own website? Maybe it's time for her to resign. And
way past time. But it's a Pyrrhic victory, surely, Yvonne, for these people who are all jumping up and down, the Toryograph readers. It is a Pyrrhic victory. Because this is just going to enrage more people, and it's going to waken up more people, surely to God this time.
Well, in a Pyrrhic victory, there are no winners, but Westminster is a clear winner. It will continue to rob and skank everything it can out of Scotland from North Sea oil. And, you know, the Unionists have had us believe that oil is a curse. When did oil ever become a curse?
Well, for the nations that America and Britain wants to steal from, it's a curse.
Scotland has an abundance of oil. And Westminster must be rubbing its hands with glee now.
But that's exactly why they didn't want to give us permission, or will never give us permission. Phil, as part of the First Minister's speech today, she suddenly, as Eva alluded to, suddenly took on the mantle of leader of the Yes movement, de facto sort of, I am the temporary leader, but you know the SNP is just one part, but I'm the leader of the whole thing. She's not led at all. For 8 years, she's never been on an AOUB march. She's never campaigned for independence per se with the Yes movement. I've not heard of her going to a Yes function. It really is time that if she's claiming to be leader of the Yes movement, that she actually started leading it and telling us what the bloody plan is.
Yep, I'm aware through management techniques and the lessons that we've been taught of many examples of leadership. And I saw leadership of a Yes movement by Alex Salmond, who was smart enough to realise that this was bigger than he was, and that the issues were much, much more important, and it did require everybody pulling together, and that all politicians being Marmite to one degree or another, to presume that she knows better than the strategy from the best strategists we've had that came narrowly close to getting his independence shows the arrogance of this person. What I want to know is, I mean, I see she's going to call a special party conference for a de facto referendum. What does that even mean? I mean, a special campaign in defence of democracy? A special camp? What have you been doing for 50 years? What is this? It's like what's more fundamental? This is the bad. I couldn't read the bottom yet. What's more fundamental than whether Scotland becomes independent and starts to say whether or not we have the what did it actually say? I actually want to know, but I can't understand why anyone would even couch a question that contains what is more important than whether or not Scotland becomes independent. Is it so? She's lost it. She's sold us. The only good thing about this is that maybe the wool will fall from the eyes of many, many more who'll finally realise that these clowns need to get out our way and stop fighting the stupid you fight your battles. We'll listen to you, but we'll do it when we get our country's independence, and you're in the way, and you need to get out of our way.
Alf, we're talking about we don't know what the First Minister's plan is. She's not made that clear. I'll come on to a wee bit of that later, but from your perspective, knowing that there's not going to be a referendum and you've got the magic wand again, you're in charge, you're the new dictator, what would you be doing tomorrow as the leader of Scotland?
I think I might be looking at Section 87 of this judgment, which tells you in no uncertain terms that violations to a treaty is a matter of international law. We should be interested in domestic law, because domestic law will always tell us where to go and what our position is. And we're just treated like a wee region. And they just disregard our sovereignty. They disregard the treaty. They disregard everything about Scotland. They even force everything on us, like the language and everything, and then take all our goodies. So that's the reality we're in. But the real issue is, it's an international treaty. We need to get out of it. It's been violated. It's always been violated. It's still being violated. That can easily be tested in any international court if anybody has the gumption to do it. The Scottish Government, by the way, is an arm of the British state. It could easily go to international courts. It could easily go to the UN. It could easily go to EFTA and apply for membership. The Scottish Government is an arm of the state. It's a recognised arm of the British state. The ministers in the Scottish Government are ministers of the Crown. They have powers to do all sorts of different things. They could try to do these things, but they've refused to do so, which can only suggest that they have no intention of delivering independence. So we do need other mechanisms, other methods. The Convention of the States been mentioned, other parties, ALBA. This is what happens in the post-colonial theory. It tells you have to create other parties, because the dominant national parties, once it's sold, it's sold. They're finished. they're
like the IPP in Ireland.
Yeah, she's in a corner, and they're in a corner now, and they're trying their best to get out of it. But, it doesn't matter what they say now. More and more people have had enough, especially the savvy independence people in the independence movement, which is now moving towards more a liberation movement. And that's by necessity, because the imperial power, or the administrative power in colonialism terms, is simply blocking the exit door. It's using any mechanisms it can. So it means the Scottish independence supporters, as it were, have to find alternative means to get out of the prison that we're in. Or as Pete Wishart called it a few weeks ago, being a hostage. I don't know whether he was serious, but Scotland's situation is we are held captive one way or another. And this Supreme Court decision just confirmed it under domestic law, which it confirms that we also have to move towards more an international dimension here. But the realization that Holyrood is just a colonial setup with a local government franchise and local government powers, it has to hit home now. It's powerless. It's not really a parliament. It's more just a.
I don't know if it's just me, but we're losing your connection here. Is it just me?
Right. Sorry.
Is Alf? Can anyone else hear Alf, or is it just me?
No, I can hear him quite well.
Yeah, it must be your connection.
It must have been me.
I think I'm more or less done anyway. The Section 87 in the judgment, I would say, is important as well. In that it tells us about treaty violations, and that's what we should really focus on. Because that, at the end of the day, is the only thing that's holding Scotland in the Union, is that treaty and the acts that came from it.
You know what the big elephant in the sitting room is? Nicola Sturgeon should stand down and let's go back and reinstall Alex Salmond as the leader of the independence movement. He knows what he's doing. He very nearly delivered it to us in 2014. He should never have resigned when he did. But he was a man of his word. He said, if he didn't get it, he would step aside. We need him back again. We need him back. because he's a leader. You know, he's there leading from the front. And I was confident with him in charge because he knew what he was doing.
Well, can I come in there, Yvonne? Because, as you know, my profession is the law. And the law is obviously very important, and the rule of law is really the basis of our democracy, and it matters, and rules matter. But the law can at times be frustrating and boring. And I don't know of any nation that achieved a return to its independent state only by virtue of entirely using the law and legal methods. Now, I don't mean that we have to do anything that's unlawful or illegal, but politics is about inspiring people. And today's decision should be the spark that reignites that determination, that fire that we had leading up to 2014, and actually it's sometimes after that too. And we need a leader who brings everybody together in the independence movement and says, okay then, we've got the legal decision from the Supreme Court. We're not arguing about that. What we're talking about is the will of the people and the political will of those politicians who have the fire in the belly, and they can say to people, now is the day, now is the hour. Scotland has had enough, and the people of Scotland deserve to be led out of the doldrums by somebody who has the guile and the wit and the ability and the political knowledge. And by God, has Alex Salmond got that in spades. But if he's not going to be reinstated as a leader, then what Nicola Sturgeon has got to do is to find the guile and the spirit and the flame and the burning capacity to say to Scotland, let's go, let's all stand as one. And we can start to do that today. We don't have to wait for her to do it. We can make her do it because our voices have got to be heard.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Eva. Phil, we get told last year sometime by the SNP there'd be no ifs, no buts. This would go ahead. And but today, when the First Minister spoke, she didn't give us really much of a clue as to what's happened. Now, we know she never allowed Plan B to be debated either at her NEC or at her conference. I mean, is there a plan? Have you heard anything from your contacts within your party that says, yeah, there is a plan and we're working to it?
No, I've heard the opposite. I've heard even from people who have, and bear in mind, this small cabal very rapidly ousts anyone they think is a threat, and there's a very small inner circle that make the decisions on behalf of the independence movement, on behalf of the SNP, and theoretically on behalf of the independents. It's all ifs and buts, and no ifs and buts. This will go ahead as what we were promised, and now we're getting well, look what they've done. We're going to have to start again from the beginnings. It's nonsense. A couple of points to raise as well. Who deemed Nicola the leader of the independence movement or the Yes movement? Alex didn't presume as much. And also, that there's, for me, a bigger elephant in the room in the fact that, is Alex the consummate politician? Is he more than capable? Is he the best we've produced in a very long time? Probably ever. Yes, undoubtedly. Should he be in a position to be able to lead the Yes movement? Yes. Sadly, I don't think he is. And sadly, the reason I believe behind that is the deliberate undermining and framing of him by individuals who know who they are. We know who they are. And what I believe is required to happen, this is time. These are desperate times. Ask the people who cannot face the payment of their bills and have got these horrific choices to make. Now is the time that we need to say, we need to take legal action here. We need to start doing, we need to progress on many fronts. One would be, what legal cases can Alex bring against those who lied against him, against those who have created this fabric of lies? And I know that's a question for Alex, and God knows he's been through a hell of a lot at the minute, but I know where his loyalties lie. He said he would disband the SNP if it meant we'd get independence. It's not about a party. It's not about ego. It's not about feeding the id. And you cannot say that about the current leader of the SNP. She deems herself to be leader of the independence movement. But we elected, we selected, we had a yes movement that was a broad church. And we had a man that was an ex-professional media presenter and organizer who knew exactly how it worked. He was calm. He was the voice of reason. He wasn't party political. And he led a movement that he was a figurehead of a movement. What actually happened was the movement pushed the movement for the people, pushed the movement forward. And that is how we do it again. And it ain't flag-waving jingoism, this party or that party. All you parties will fall in line behind the people, but the people have to activate. We have to mobilise. And it takes some I know are working on plans that can enable our action. And then when we get a mechanism and the vehicle in place, and we all know it does require political parties, we will be able to do it, because what I am hearing is the growing discontent within SNP MPs and MSPs. We've already seen the fractures appearing in the Scottish government, and I'm acutely aware of fractures that have and are currently still in the MPs down at Westminster. Thankfully, even the privileged are feeling restless, probably because they feel their cushy wee numbers under threat. I'm sorry, guys, but there's too many in there who feel that way. Thankfully, there's enough who can trigger this and who are pushing for it, who I know will push for it. That's where our hope comes. The people becoming aware of what's going on, realising that we're being played, sadly, by someone we trusted to lead us towards salvation. And we've been betrayed. It's a horrendous thing. It's probably the most difficult thing to forgive. And for me, I don't really care. I think it's time Nicola just jogged on. I think she should leave the country, to be quite honest, because she's nothing but a negative. She's a negative influence. She's counter. There's nothing she can do that can positively influence the cause of the people gaining their independence in this country. She's sold us out. She's betrayed us. She needs to go.
Controversial stuff there from you, Mr. Boswell. Alf, with all your studying of post-colonialism, what do you see happening next? Does it take a spark?
Well, it usually just takes one nationalist majority for a country to declare independence. And we've had 6, 3 at Holyrood, 3 at Westminster. But they don't have the courage to do it. And yet that's the simplest mechanism, as many former British Prime Ministers have told Scottish nationalists historically, even up to just a few years ago, within all their lifetimes. That was the way to do it. And it's only the devolved parliament that's created another stumbling block, if you like, been put in the way. But if you disregard the devolved parliament as basically just a colonial administration, then you have to revert back to that process of a national majority, a nationalist majority of members of parliament. That is what they're there for. That's their really only purpose. And that's what they should do. If they won't do it, they have to be replaced by people who will do it. That's people elected at the next election who will do that, precisely that, end the union there and then, and that's it, finished. And we go on from there. That's the way to do it, as they say. But and that's the only real option we have. The problem is time is running out because nothing stays the same. Scotland's population is dramatically changing year on year. And the unionist strategists know this very well. And the hidden census will tell us quite a lot more once we see it, if we ever see it.
If we ever see it.
Yeah, the Edinburgh University studies in 2014, the post-referendum studies, showed demonstrably that the way people vote is largely based on their national identity. And that is very much related to culture and language, as I found in my research for my book, Dunhodden. And that gives what the post-colonial theory tells you is your national consciousness of a people. And without the national consciousness, there's no basis for independence. Independence movements are always dependent on, one is the oppressed ethnic group, which in our case is Scots language speakers. And the second factor is that peoples in self-determination conflict are always linguistically divided. That's the same in Quebec, in Ireland, in Catalonia, in Ukraine, in Scotland. It's exactly the same. There is a very good reason why English studies was sent to the colonies first in India in the 1820s and then rolled out to every other colony from Scotland to Ireland to Kenya, wherever. English studies was dominant in providing that cultural assimilation process. We're still going through that cultural assimilation process with the media, with everything else is controlled, the narrative is controlled, the culture is controlled, the values of society comes through in that. So this is what colonialism is. It's cultural and also described as colonial assimilation. And that's a cultural control mechanism that affects, it basically confuses the hell out of a native population because they then don't know which persona they have. It's what Professor Tom Devine called a dual persona. We're Scottish and British, and we didn't ken what we are sometimes. But linguists call that a false persona because one of these personas is natural. That's your Scots natural mother tongue culture, and the other is manufactured. It's only brought into the country through enforced English studies in schools. And the fact that Scots language is not taught, people are deprived of their language. And that, as we know from the Council of Europe repeatedly, is one of the biggest problems in Scotland. We've not taught our mother tongue, which is the Scots language. And that leads to the confusion of a people. Half the people vote against their own liberation because they have that dual persona or that false persona, rather. And that's the reality of colonialism, which then that cultural control allows the country to be fleeced, allows it to be exploited economically. You have a meritocracy that's largely Anglophone, largely a lot of it drawn from outside Scotland. And that's the way the colonial situation arises. You have that mediocre meritocracy that controls everything and enables the economic exploitation and plunder, the external political control. But that's all done culturally. And of course, the native elites all embark in this process because colonialism depends on the cooperation of a native elite. And we see this big time in the Scottish private schools, bringing out most of our meritocratic leadership. And the rest of the people are culture that is discarded and subordinated and marginalised. And that's the reality of a colonial situation. So where this judgment is very wrong indeed, is on its consideration of colonialism and self-determination. It has no idea about the characteristics of colonialism. And the characteristics of colonialism are pretty much driven right through the Scottish dimension today, with half the population living in poverty, an economy totally plundered by external private sector offshore interests, external political control, quite significant occupation as well, and cultural assimilation. So all these characteristics of colonialism basically hold Scotland tight in this prison, if you like.
No pun intended. Indeed, we're told daily that we're poor, stupid and weak, and that England subsidises jet. The Chancellor in his statement this week or last week, taking 80 billion out of the North Sea to save Mother England. Typical. And on your point about colonialism, I was waiting the football starting yesterday and I mistimed it. There was a programme on called Escape to the Country. I don't know if you watched it. And there was this young English couple who were selling some one-bedroom flat down south for about 8 million quid or something, I don't know. And they were up looking to come and live in Scotland. And the presenter was English. And they went to places like Clinder and Loch Lomond and all around the Trossachs, and they were looking at houses in Argyll and Bute in particular. And they spoke to locals and said, "How do you like it?" "Well, I've been here from London for 8 years." And they "Yeah, I've been here for 10 years, 50. There wasn't a Scottish accent among them. Everyone had an English accent. And then we had one guy who does flights over you can fly over all the lochs. Looks fabulous, by the way, from Loch Lomond. And he was Scottish, but shall we say, of a middle-class background, definitely. But there was a twang of Scot in there. But the pilot was even English. Jesus, could you not find a Scottish pilot? who would have more affinity to the air, but a side issue is how it's happening. Eva, when we were listening to the First Minister today, making her, I don't know, excuses, her defence, I don't know. What she did, she was asked the question by one of the BritNat media people, would you be involving the Greens, the ISP, Alapa Party, and other parties in this? And she couldn't give it, I will involve everyone who wants independence. She sort of brushed that to the side and said, this was the bit that got me. Well, no, I'm in a Democratic Party and I can't make decisions for the party. It's up for the party to make decisions, which I found hysterical, knowing what's happened to that party. But she did sort of mention, again, when she was talking about the election and plebiscite, she was talking again SNP. She wasn't talking Scotland United or other parties.
It's really very telling, isn't it? And I think the sad aspect of this is that her party conference that she wants to have next year is absolutely unnecessary, because if she'd have done her homework, she would have had a process and a plan ready to go today, if not before today. You know, if you're a lawyer and you're waiting for a court's decision, you don't sit on your hands and wait for the decision. You plot what you're going to do when the decision is released, and you have half a dozen different possible avenues that you might pursue. All the more so if you're a politician and you're elected to gain independence for your country. You're supposed to have a strategy because you've thought of all possible options. You know, we go back to Alex Salmond every time. As soon as today's decision was released, you had a press release from him where he said in terms what ought to be happening. It's what he's been saying for a long time now. Constitutional Convention, popular opinion, international support. These are all obvious. These are all areas where the First Minister should have got the finger out long ago. So what she has now said, obviously, about having this conference is, I think, actually redundant, because if you go back to the speech that she made when she announced the current process, and her words are very important. We need precision. You know, listen to what she says, not what you think she says, or what you have said. What she said in terms was that if the decision came out as it's done today, whereby it does transpire that, according to the Supreme Court, there is no lawful way for this Parliament, Holyrood, to give the people of Scotland the choice of independence in a referendum, and if the UK government continues to deny a Section 30 order, my party will fight the UK general election on this single question: should Scotland be an independent country? Now, that's her policy, that's her plan, it's already there. There is no reason for her to have a conference. All she has to do, if independence is truly her goal, is to lift the phone to the leaders of the other independence supporting parties and say, let's talk about how we best manage this plebiscite. And if she was a realist and if she was honest, she would read the runes and she'd be reading the comments on social media and she'd be speaking to people on the streets, and they'd be telling her that some folk are very scunnered with the SNP, and there are many SNP MPs and MSPs whose seats will be in jeopardy at both a Westminster election and at a Holyrood election. And some of those people are not the strongest candidates to be representing Scotland in independence negotiations. And for the good of Scotland, not necessarily the good of the SNP and not necessarily the good of Nicola Sturgeon, for the good of the people of Scotland, we should be talking about Scotland United, because Scotland United will never be defeated. But if Scotland is represented only by the SNP, then you can look forward to being dragged right up that cul-de-sac time after time after time, while we watch our country being bled dry and powers being stripped from Holyrood, as opposed to our independence being regained.
Yeah, if she's reading comments on Twitter, it won't be mine. She's got me blocked. I hear she's chasing after Pete Wishart's record for how many people she can block. She doesn't want to hear, Yvonne. She doesn't listen. I mean, everyone's been telling her for long enough, this won't fly. But she didn't listen. Her lawyers told her during the famous case with Alec, this won't fly, but she kept going. She doesn't seem to be capable, Yvonne, of listening to anyone except whatever her small coterie is of, that political giant Peter Murrell. And who else? Alan Eyebrows Smith, Pete Wishart. I mean, she doesn't listen to people, does she?
No, and she is out of tune with people on the street as well. And if she was a leader of any gravitas at all, she would be getting the beat of the street at the moment. Instead, we've all been humiliated and told London says no. That's what we've been told. And this is bound to knock the confidence of Scots, that London has told them, no, you can't have a referendum, because it just perpetuates the idea that they're in this, that we are powerless. Anyway, I found Nicola's plan B. There it is.
Nice blank piece of paper.
On Prism, a blank piece of paper. That is Nicola's plan B.
I mean,
she needs to go. She needs to resign. We need to get somebody back in control. We need to bring back Alex Salmond, a man who knows how to deal with London, how to negotiate with Westminster, and he actually still has a lot of respect down there. And they would listen.
He puts the fear of God into them, that's for sure.
Independence without Alex. And I think the sooner people realise that, the better.
Yeah. Phil, on September the 19th, 2014, Alex, stood in front of us all and said that he was resigning, that he had, taken the party, he had failed in its main mission to get his independence. Now, lots of us didn't want him to resign. And with hindsight, God, I wish he hadn't. And I wish he hadn't appointed who he did. But that aside, but he did what he believed to be the right and honourable thing. And again, he's showing his decency. He resigned because I haven't given you what I promised I would give you. So maybe someone else picking up the cudgels and running with it will get where I couldn't take you. Honourable. With hindsight, as I say, not a great move, but it was honourable. Now, here is a First Minister who didn't even get to first base. Now, he had 6 MPs, let's remember, he had 6 MPs at the time. Here's a First Minister with huge majorities, with 3 huge majorities down in Westminster, and she loses in the Supreme Court down in England. She doesn't even get to the first base and get us to a referendum. She should surely resign today. She has failed the raison d'etre of the Scottish National Party from 1934, written into her DNA of gaining independence. She should go.
Yeah, I think we all agree that, but she doesn't have that awareness. She'll do what she wants. Nicola will do what she wants. I mean, Alex, you're talking about at 6 MPs, and he tried. I don't remember him promising that he would deliver. I remember him promising to try and do everything within his power, and he would disband the SNP if it meant they could win, that nothing else mattered, that this is the reason why the SNP exists and what we should be prioritising. And instead, and Nicola, she pulled this stunt going to a court where we knew it was a heads they win, tails we lose scenario. Everybody told her that. Everybody told, and let's not. Although Nicola needs to go, I don't care. I really don't care what happens to Nicola now. All I know is she's no good for us. She's not good for us. But it's not just her; it's everybody who follows her philosophy. Because I'm watching what's going on, and I'm seeing reactions on some of the social media sites, and I see some of these children that are involved. And I mentioned something about earlier. I don't feel safe to speak at this. I don't feel this is a safe space. And if that's what you're concerned about, then what the hell are you doing in a revolution? the hell are you doing in a revolution? Get out of the way, child. I mean, and it really is long overdue that these clowns are shifted. And what Nicola's done is she's destroyed the SNP. She's bringing to the end of, not the end, because a party can always resurface. It just takes new leadership, but not just Nicola. A lot of the old people I call friends and colleagues you have to go to, I'm afraid. Unless you're willing, there comes a time, and I've spoke about this many times, there's the dichotomy, the challenge when you are a human being, and if you're a decent human being and you get a pile on or everybody says you're wrong, a decent human being will question themselves. A civilized, rational human being with any self-awareness will am I wrong? What have I done? Should I apologise? No, I firmly believe you shouldn't apologise unless you've done something to apologise for. But Nicola is one of these individuals who has no such self-awareness. There are many, and a growing number that's saying not only she's wrong, but she's betrayed us. Mm-hmm. And she's just refusing to listen. She just carries on. So no, there's a whole group of people who are in it for a completely different purpose, and these are the ones that need to be moved on. That has to be that surgery I spoke about last week, that cleansing of, and I don't mean anything overly radical. See this is the difference between us and these radicals, these wokeratis that want to silence people and deplatform folk. I believe all voices should have the right to be heard. Some voices are worth listening to more than others, but that's for me to decide, not for you to tell me, and not to put these wee clowns and put these idiots who, for me, they've got an ideology. They're ideologically possessed, as many have said before. Man doesn't have ideas. Ideas often possess the man or the woman. And that's what's happened here. These people are driven by ideologues and ideologies that are ill-fitting with the culture of Scotland. Yes, we want fairness. Yes, we want a more egalitarian, a fairer society. But there's too many people here who are putting their childish notions of principle ahead of reality and of the fact that the only method, the only vehicle we have to stop the deprivation, the poverty, the suicides, the depression, the downward spiral, the theft of our identity, our dignity, the only thing that can get us away from that and allow us to escape and our people to escape is independence. And if you don't recognise you're in the way, then we will have to show them they're in the way by removing the SNP. And that is a terrible state of affairs.
No, I know there's an awful lot of MPs and MSPs who block me on social media. I must be doing something right, but there's a heck of a lot that don't. And I've had a message from a couple of them, 2 MPs and 1 MSP, who say, keep doing what you're doing. And I've written back to them and said, how about you doing something instead? Because my little contribution is we need others in that party to pick up. Now, we're running out of time. So the last word with our dear friend, Professor Alf Baird here. Alf, we've been a lot of negative stuff here today, it's fair to say. There's not been a lot of positivity because there's not much to be positive about today as we speak, although some glimmers. Do you see anything that you can send us all to our bed with tonight that comes out of today that has got any positivity in it? You're on mute. That's probably why, but probably... Does that mean no?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, Roddy. Sorry. Maybe mute was a good idea. But I think that our biggest problem is the media are still pushing the falsehoods of what we see. And as long as they're doing that, we have a big challenge to make. But I think a lot of people can see through the nonsense. I tend to think independence will never be delivered by the bourgeoisie, and that's what post-colonial theory tells us as well. It takes folk for the schemes, if you like myself, and others that have come up and done things despite the damn system that's levelled against us. I mean, the whole system's weighed against us. Our inequality in our society is entirely the balance, the other side of the balance sheet of colonialism. If without colonialism, this would be a really rich society with opportunities for everybody, not based on the way they speak either. They might even be taught their own language. So we've got to lift the inequality is because of this system we have, which is colonial in all its respects. So we have to get over that. I think we need to depend on all these people that came out and voted yes back in 2014 was for the people that were suffering the most decided to come out eventually and vote for the first time, many of them. And I know that Alex Salmond alluded to that in many cases as well, whenever he travelled around. And that's where we have to figure it out. But essentially, I think what the other thing about post-colonial theory, it tells you that the people's understanding of independence remains rudimentary. They don't understand what independence is about. And that also goes for the bourgeoisie. They didn't understand what it's about. They didn't really figure it out. Until they figure out their oppression, until they figure out the reason why Scotland's fleeced, why its culture is marginalised, why its people are unequal, why it has masses of poverty, and why it doesn't look any different from a really less developed country somewhere. Until we figure out that reality, we're still wondering what independence is. The people need to know what independence is. And that's what I've been trying to write about the last couple of years, is about colonialism and the theory of colonialism, because it fits Scotland like a really neat 300-year-old suit. And we have to, that's the message we have to get across. Once people understand their oppression, they understand why they have to end it. And of course, the other conclusion here is that with colonialism, there's only two options: either liberation from oppression or cultural assimilation, where the people and their nation and their culture perish. And that's what's happening to Scotland now. So if we didn't get out of this mess, we as a nation, a people, a culture, we will perish. It's what Frantz Fanon calls independence is a fight for a national culture. And that's why culture is so important. Not that the Scottish government would know anything about that, but that's why culture is so important in this case. And that's what we have to try and get that message out about what independence really means.
Yeah, we had a discussion on Sunday, and Yvonne pointed out and was quite upset, I would say is a fair word, is that in the very area you're talking about, in the Lynn constituency last week, we had an election with the people who most need the change, and only 23% bothered to turn up. So it's going to take a lot of re-energising, and I agree with you. And it did nearly work for us before, but we let them down in 2014 because nothing changed. So we've got to find a way of connecting with them again and doing something about it. But, ladies and gentlemen, as always, the clock has beaten us. And if we keep going on, we'll have nothing left to say for this week's big show. Weekend, we'll have nothing left to say. So can I thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for making time today to come and see us on this auspicious or horrible day for Scotland. This momentous day for Scotland, which I think just might be a catalyst for us to see some change, and I hope it is. And those people attending some demonstration rallies tonight, I think they're calling them, I'll have plenty to say about that at the weekend, because we promoted it on this show. I wrote a blog about promoting it, about unity, and we got nonsense from the children that Phil refers to up in Aberdeen, who were putting conditions and allowing anyone from a non-SNP party to speak tonight. Now, this goes out after they've had their meeting. It's a disgrace. If you want independence, stop the bloody nonsense and let's get unified. Divided, we will never succeed. Get it sorted out, SNP. And on that little rant, it's not just Mr. Boswell that can get angry, it's me too. I will say, bid you farewell and ask you and yours to please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.